So yeah, thank you everybody for joining us for our second session of the day, and we hope that you will continue to support us and remain for the rest of the day and even come for tomorrow's virtual session. So my name is Mahmoud. I am a college student at Montclair State University. I serve as the president of the Students Just in Palestine at Montclair, and I am also in my position at PACC. I serve as the youth leader, and I've been a part of PACC, and I've been part of community organizing for as long as I can remember. So thank you guys for having me. So today for our second segment, we are having Laila and Sami Shaban, Laila Elhaddad and Sami Shaban, and we're going to be talking about Gaza and grassroots activism. And so before we begin, I want to reiterate that the goal of this conference is not only to listen, but to be inspired and move on from it. There's a purpose behind what we're doing, and we want to be as intentional and focused in our advocacy as possible. So our last session mentioned this already, but if you look around the room, we have our I Pledge posters. So when you walk in and out of this room at any point, we want you guys to write something on these posters, write what you pledge to do, write what you take away from these discussions, because we want everyone to be able to take something away from it and not just come out of here knowing something they already did or not knowing anything. So, make sure that you guys are recording on those pages. And so now, without further ado, I want to introduce our panelists, Laila Elhaddad and Sami Shaban. So, Laila Elhaddad is a Maryland-based freelance journalist, author, political analyst, and parent of two from Gaza.
Four.
Who's counting?
At some point, you just count. Yeah.
Parent of four from Gaza. Between 2003 and 2007, named for the award-winning blog she has authored since 2004, and the Gaza Kitchen, which is her cookbook. She was a contributor to the Goldstone Report and the legacy of the landmark investigation of the Gaza conflict, which was published in 2011. And recently, she was a plaintiff in the historic federal lawsuit against the Biden administration for the president and other senior U.S. officials' failure in their legal duty to prevent and their complicity in Israel's genocide in Gaza. Sami Shaban currently serves on the Board of Education in Franklin Township and Somerset County, New Jersey. Sami's also a founder and board member for many nonprofits, including the Islamic Relief Endowment, as well as the Center for Islamic Life at Rutgers University. Most recently, Sami has been involved in forming the New Jersey Muslim Coalition, a grouping of the largest masajid and centers in New Jersey. He's also a small business owner and a practicing attorney with 14 years of experience counseling businesses and nonprofit institutions on corporate, commercial, franchise law, and business immigration. Sami is known to practice law in New York, in New Jersey, and he has a bachelor's from Rutgers, his law degree from Seton Hall, and a master's from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. And the most important aspect, I believe, between either of you guys is that both are from Gaza, both have family in Gaza, and both have been at the forefront in their communities fighting and advocating for Gaza and for Palestine here in the U.S. So let's please give them a warm welcome.
You know what, Sami? It's like, Hani Madhoun, right? Were you the one trying to get people out?
We're going to have just an open discussion between myself and Laila and Sami, talking about Gaza, talking about their advocacy and their backgrounds. We're going to do that for as long as we feel we need to be honest. But we're going to cap it at about an hour, I say. That's one. Probably less than that, maybe. And then we're going to open it up to... We're going to open it to Q&A after. So anything you guys take away from our discussion or any questions that you guys might have, make sure you save them for the end for our Q&A portion. Please feel to save your questions to share them out loud at the end. So write them on an index card. Or if you're tuning in from home on Zoom, make sure you type out your questions throughout the session, and we'll get to them all at the end in the order they were received. Okay, so How are you guys?
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
So, in preparing myself for our panel, obviously the thing on my mind, first and foremost, is the fact that you guys both have family in Gaza. You guys have both been to Gaza. And so, for my first question, I was going to ask you guys, how would you describe your earliest memory of Gaza? And if you want to say it in one word and then elaborate, you can, or just go ahead. How would you describe your earliest memory of Gaza?
You have the microphone.
No, go ahead, start. I'm going to play the role of moderator. And I want to learn, tell me, what's your connection to Gaza? I would love to, I always like to learn. What's your connection to Gaza? When did you first go? What family do you have there? Or maybe you want to use this more poetic way of one word.
I don't know if I can summarize it into one word, but Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي ربي زدني علما. Bismillah. Gaza is an amazing place. Palestine is an amazing place. I think Bill Clinton said it best when he visited, and he said...
Bill Clinton said something good in the context of Gaza? Yeah?
He
Okay,
really
let's
did.
hear it.
He actually said that whole area, if it wasn't under siege or at war, it would be the most visited place on earth. Within an hour, think about all the things you can have. When I was a kid, we could do those things. This was within our reach. Like, we could leave Gaza and go to Jerusalem. That was the thing. Like, we did a whole tour. We landed in Syria, we drove to Amman, then we drove to Gaza, then we drove to Cairo. That is unfathomable these days. But I did that as a kid. And it was...
When was this? Sorry, I'm trying to get an age range.
So, it would have been around 1990.
Okay.
Around 1990, late 80s, around 1990. I've been to Gaza many times, but within 1 hour, you have the beautiful Mediterranean coast, right? Gaza is on the Mediterranean coast. You have beautiful trees of groves, the mountains, even some ice and snow at the top of some of them. Then you can go to Akka, and you could be like in the middle of a desert, right? Then you can go to the Dead Sea, and you're at the lowest place on earth. So you can go from being in a very rich, beautiful, lustrous environment to being in a very arid environment, to being in a very cold environment, to being in your shorts and t-shirt on the Mediterranean Sea, all within 1 hour. And on top of that, you have Jerusalem right there nestled with all the religions, the major monotheistic religions in the world, that you can go visit. You have the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and down the road, literally a 5-minute walk, you've got Masjid al-Aqsa, and between them you've got the Wailing Wall. The Wailing Wall is actually on the front right side of Masjid al-Aqsa. So you have all of that within just a stone's throw. So growing up in Gaza was beautiful because you could get all of that within a 1-day trip. It was something so amazing. The food there was...
How long were you there? Were you born there or would you visit?
I wasn't born there. So my just as a bit of history, my dad was born in Jaffa, and in 1948 he remembers being removed from his home at gunpoint. So he and his family were removed at gunpoint. My grandfather at the time thought that they were going to go back, as many people did. So they just packed whatever they had on their backs, they got in a car and they left. They never saw their home again.
Maybe we can put the map up and show people.
My mother was born in Gaza.
Is there a map?
So my mom was born in Gaza, and
going.
she lived until she was
One more.
18 or 19 years old, and then she immigrated over here.
There we go. Yeah, you can just put that up.
There you go.
Yeah.
So my dad was born in Jaffa, or Jaffa as it's written there, and my mom was born in Gaza. So I've been there, I think, 5 or 6 times. The last time I went, actually, was Sa'il. I don't know where he is. We went on a relief mission with George Galloway, where we only got 24 hours, but we were able to deliver good. So growing up, I used to love the idea of going to Gaza. It was one of the most beautiful places and still remains one of the most beautiful places on earth. And it was just full of family. My dad is one of 13. My mom is one of 9. So everywhere was family. We have this amazing, I guess you could call it a slushy or drink. It's called barad.
Wait, yesterday I was in Nablus and I saw someone had left a cup of barad.
Yes.
And I tried to figure out where it was from, but nobody knew where it was from.
So it's probably from Basha now, because I convinced the Basha guys to put barad there. But
Oh my gosh! So I was telling the big Gaza group, wait, guys, I'm in Paris and I saw Barad, and everybody
Yes.
was like, where is it?
But that is more actually barad that they have in like Dafa, so it's not actually Gaza approved barad in my opinion.
Okay.
As much as I love Basha, but it's not Gaza approved barad. But there is barad, and it's this most delicious like lemonade, milky drink that you could have, right? There's a kunafa that's just for people from Gaza. There's no cheese. It's got nuts in it. It's delicious. You can eat like a kilo of it and feel like you're still hungry, right? When we went with George Galloway, just to let you know one little thing, we went with George Galloway, we had, I think, 2 buses. So you say about 100 people. We arrive inside of Gaza, and Gaza is a very poor area at this time. So this was, I think, 2008. I don't know where saw it is, but I think it was like 2008. We go, everybody on the bus orders falafel, the most delicious falafel sandwich you ever have in your life. We all order our falafel sandwiches, so we're ordering 100 of them from this little street vendor guy, right? We go to pay him, he refuses. And we're like, no. We're here as a relief mission. And he said, no way, you're our guests. That is emblematic of the generosity that you will find throughout Palestine and particularly in Gaza. They will never, imagine 100 people with this small vendor, this would have been like so much for him, but he refused and we could not force him to take that money. So that's a nutshell of some of my experiences in Gaza.
Thank you, Sami. So I was born in Kuwait, and then I was explaining to, can I call you Abd Bari? We had a whole thing yesterday about how I think it's weird that he's called Bari, but anyway, sorry. Stop.
I could get into all that.
Okay. Anyways, but then my whole childhood I was in Saudi Arabia, and we had a Gaza Hawiya and Palestinian passport. So my whole childhood was spent commuting between 1980s, and you experienced the first Intifada. A lot of my earliest memories and associations were how difficult it was to get to Gaza. And I suspect anywhere, because initially in the 80s we had to go through the Jisr, not through Rafah. And I just remember days upon days of waiting, being strip searched at the Jisr by the Israeli soldiers. And then when we finally made it through after 24 hours, having to then, in addition, go, several more hours to Gaza, and there was often be a curfew or a strike or something. And those are my very earliest memories. And I just remember thinking, God, why is it so difficult to get back home? And being a little bit bitter, resentful of my mother, why are you making us go through this? And of course, it's something that you only appreciate when you become a mother and you're older. The sort of the lengths you have to go to as a Palestinian to help your children retain their connection to Palestine. Despite all these overwhelming forces intending to deprive you of homeland and deprive you of rootedness and deprive you of identity and connection. All of this is intentional to make that experience as miserable as possible. And then that's behind the system of the ID card, right? The Hawiya. When you talked about how really small Palestine is and how beautiful and how varied, a lot of those experiences and those spaces are completely foreign and inaccessible to most Palestinians, right? You're maybe only familiar with one aspect of that, or you never even had a chance to experience all that at the same time. And again, that's intentional. It's the fragmentation and separation, especially in recent years, was one of the stated goals of the blockade on Gaza, in the words of the Israeli architects that designed it, was to separate and further the separation and fragmentation of Palestinians in Gaza from the rest of Palestine. So those are some of my earliest memories. God, but then when we finally, of course, would get there, besides the heat, spending time on my grandfather's Bayara farm in central Gaza between Khan Yunis, my mother's family is from the south, and Khan Yunis, my father from Gaza City, between the orange groves and the guava trees, and all of that was completely razed to the ground in the second Intifada. Now is like sand, right? It's dust. But spending time there, spending time on the beach in Gaza City, with the seafood and swimming in the Mediterranean coast off Gaza was notoriously wild and gorgeous, and being introduced to seafood through my father. One of his favorite things to make was, I don't know if you ever had stuffed crabs, but in Gaza City they're famous for their stuffed grilled crabs. Just all of those experiences. Barad, of course, Kazim in the city. Yeah. But all of that also simultaneously felt completely, inaccessible to other Palestinians. Gaza seemed like this foreign, alien place to them. And I don't think of Gaza, you said poor, I don't think of it ever as a poor place. In fact, I usually start off by reminding people, I don't know if you can go to the very first picture in the beginning. One more. So I say this is what Google pulls up when you put Gaza, right? And this is what most people associate with Gaza, right? Bombed out buildings, destitution, war. And of course, that's part of the story. And especially now, it would be, almost inappropriate not to talk about it in that context. But if you go to the next one, this is Gaza City. This is a picture I took from where we live in the city, overlooking, or was, I should say. This is called the Jundi Majhul Park, and we live like right here. This entire park has now been reduced to a large sand mound. This is one of the main landmarks of Gaza, where I used to take my son and we would hang out. But this is what I think of when I think Gaza, and I think of all those beautiful memories, and I think of how, again, difficult any time that we've ever attempted to get to Gaza as a child. Even after I came here and, an older age, I came here for college, and then I moved back to Gaza after I finished, graduate school, and I lived there for a long time with my son, and I kept commuting back and forth because I felt like I was deprived of the ability to really experience it at length. It was always in these spurts, right? Visits, and to renew our Hawiyya, our ID card, and so on, to visit family. So I lived there for a while in the 2000s, the second Intifada, through the beginning of the Israeli disengagement, the Palestinian elections, the beginning of the blockade. But yeah, it's always, this is what I think of when I think of Gaza, and I think of family, and I think of all the beauty, and I think of the people. I was telling Abdel Bari earlier about how every time I go back, I'm constantly, even as someone from Gaza, surprised to find this thirst for and zest for life and passion and knowledge and learning, and I think you mentioned the generosity is something that Palestinians in Gaza have been famous for since time immemorial. But in addition, I've recently learned in a lot of the research I've done, they've also been famous for their innovation. So their generosity, their innovation. I always like to show, I don't know if I have it here, but if you go forward a couple of pictures, one more. No, keep going forward. One more. Do I have it here? One more. No, maybe I don't. Usually I show a picture of how many people here know that the origin of the word gauze is from Gaza? Did anyone know that? Yeah, a few people. But if you dig back in history, you find all these really interesting tidbits and facts. Empires that have all tried to conquer Gaza at one point or another on their way to going conquering the Levant, but what it's constantly pops up in history for is it's being a center of trade, Cantilism, spice routes, trade routes, being a major port along the Mediterranean, its furniture industry, its barley production, and on and on and on. These are the things Gaza was known for. Now you say Gaza and people think, oh my gosh, poor Gaza. Gaza's always the victim, right? But of course there's a larger story behind that. But I always try to focus it on what you were saying. What are your personal, your beautiful memories of Gaza? But sorry, we could go on, but I want to distract. Just on this one question, we could spend the whole.
I never had the blessing to go to Gaza. I've been to Palestine 4 times.
And the food, sorry, I just want to say I'm partial. Having visited a lot of places in Palestine, I can definitively say that there's no food better than the food of Gaza. So if that offends people, but
very objective.
I'll have to contest that.
Yeah. Well, no, it's true though. I feel like nobody uses spices anywhere in Palestine. I'm like, what gives, So, oh man, am I offending folks though?
You just lost the audience.
Oh
man.
My parents, so they immigrated here in '89 from Dufa, and my mom actually, so she went to a private boarding school in Quds. Her elementary years, and she would tell us about how they took trips to Gaza when she was younger, and she remembers she would tell me the story about how when they were driving in on their buses, all they would see is the orange tree groves as
yeah.
they were coming in.
In northern Gaza, yeah.
In northern Gaza, as they were going in. And that's her core memory that I try to like envision myself.
Yeah.
And my father, he worked as a teacher, and he went to Gaza a few times to teach, and you know, he always talks about, he has friends still from there, and he talks about how people there are extremely welcoming and
Yeah.
hospitable, and you know, the ideas I have of Gaza are secondary,
Right.
but you know, my brother married someone from Gaza, so we kind of we had to make the.
And you know, there was a railroad, just on the point of, we think of Gaza as very isolated, but there was a railroad, Ottoman Railways, connecting Gaza all the way to Haifa. My mother would routinely, when you were saying when she was growing up there in the 50s, and she would take the train and studying in Egypt from Gaza. It would go from Rafah all the way to Cairo, to Alexandria, actually, yeah. So that's hard for people to imagine. It wasn't that long ago, but yeah.
Just to segue a little, so I mean, you guys both spent a good amount of your time here. You guys got your educations in American schools for a good portion. Laila, you got your bachelor's here?
Yeah.
So you guys both did your higher education in America. You know, me as a college student now, kind of going through the ropes of trying to be someone who's advocating for Palestine and trying to even be Palestinian while navigating through the difficulties of trying to represent and trying to identify as Palestinian. So would you guys be able to shed a little light on how it was for you guys growing up and identifying as Palestinian on American college campuses, and if you've seen a shift in that now? So if you guys can just talk a little about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, you can start. When did you go to college?
96.
Oh, okay, so we're exactly the same age.
Go
Okay.
ahead.
No, go. Okay, well, so this is easy because we're exactly the same age,
Yeah.
it sounds like. So, okay, so I remember coming here, I was 18, and I was in North Carolina, and saying the word, not that you couldn't say it, but writing or talking about yourself as Palestinian, or even saying or writing the word Palestine was still very much not the norm. And I would even dare say considered controversial, especially in the American South. So I was writing for the school paper at the time and constantly met with a flood of comments of like, why is this person saying Palestine doesn't exist? You know, why is she saying Palestine or she's Palestinian? Why is she referring to a place called Palestine? That was still very much, just to give you a sense of how the discourse has really shifted and changed. We tend to take that for granted, but I think that's important to refer to whenever I'm trying to remind people that progress has been made, there's hope, it doesn't feel that way. The fact that it's considered non-objectionable that Israel is an apartheid state in most, I would say, circles, or that is engaging in apartheid policies. I mean, again, that was not a thing back then. We were still struggling to get people to recognize the fact that there's Palestinians. I wouldn't say that college campuses, I mean, again, this is like several years before 9/11, college campuses were as active on issues of Palestine. For us, the big issue in the 90s was Iraq, right? I mean, I don't know how your campus was, but all of our organizing tended to focus on the sanctions on Iraq at the time and the children that were being starved and so forth. But smaller events. So I would say it wasn't until the late 90s and the early 2000s, 9/11, when we began to see more. But I don't know what your experience was. I didn't feel like there was a solid... Most of the work that was being done at that time, I would say, was by national Arab advocacy organizations trying to lead the way in countering stereotyping of Palestinians and Arabs at large in Hollywood and cinema and so on. But I didn't feel like we had a voice or like a presence. There wasn't... SJPs weren't around at the time. We started at Duke, like an Arab student organization. That was about the extent of our organizing. We would invite people, Hanan Ashrawi and so forth, to speak, just to be able to at least raise the plight, bring the plight of the Palestinians. But this was also just a few years after, like Edward Said's seminal essay, maybe a decade after Permission to Narrate. So it was very much the notion. You also didn't have, I will say, as many Palestinian writers, authors, people narrating their own experience as Palestinians at that time. that really started, I would say, like the year 2000 and after, when suddenly this new generation of, ushered in this new generation of Palestinians that began to narrate their own stories, narrate their own experiences. Up until that point, I didn't feel like that existed.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in America and would just visit back in Gaza. So my experience growing up here was, when I was very young, I was embarrassed in some ways of being Palestinian, right? And the reason being is that when I was growing up in my white town, everything was, the Palestinians are suicide bombers and things like that. That was like a really big deal. And so growing up as a kid, I didn't have like a strong identity to cling to. My parents were divorced when I was very young, so it was just me and my mom. So there wasn't really much that I could really grab onto in terms of that. And when I would go back to Palestine, that sort of like, you're not as good as us was sort of re-emphasized, right? So we would be on a bus full of Americans and they would just pull me and my dad out. So even on that trip that I was telling you about from Syria, we brought all these delicious, amazing desserts and we brought them in, and then they took me in. Again, I'm like 10, 11 years old at the time. And I don't know why, all the Americans are going through, I go to the side and they say, come over here. Okay, now come in this room, take off all your clothes. I'm like, take off all my clothes? Why am I taking off all my clothes? So now I'm naked, and now they take one of those wands, the metal detecting ones, and they go all up and down my skin as if there's something inside of me that might be the problem, right? And then so we go through that process, and this is sort of compounding the already feelings that I had back in America. That like, okay, then we go and all these delicious desserts. Damascus is one of the capitals so we're bringing it to our family. They take them all beautifully wrapped and packaged, beautiful. They open every single one of them. And then they're like, eat from it.
This is where
This is on the border.
Of
When we're coming into Gaza.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So they're like, eat from it. I'm like, why? They're like, no, eat from it. So every single dessert, every single gift that we had brought in, they made us destroy it before we could actually give it. Again, it's sort of this mental warfare, right?
Yes.
So carrying that with me was pretty traumatic, right? It just constantly sort of made that feeling. So college actually for me was a great place because I got to meet a whole lot more Muslim people, a whole lot more Palestinian people, but we didn't have much of a voice, right? You would say something, but you again felt like you were up against this enormous mountain. You tried to do your best. Even for SILRU, the Center for Islamic Life, when I would pray at Rutgers, we would have to pray, and there was like this little corner, I remember it was in the student center, I showed it to my son. It was right next to the garbages, right? But that was the only, so that's why I became, so these types of experiences inform the future. So that's what made me say, no, we need to change this. So now we have a whole house that's right next to the student center for kids to pray in.
Yeah.
And on every one of our pillars in front of it, you have 6 pillars that have the 99 names of Allah on it. So we are unabashedly out there now. So if you talk about the difference, I would say it's almost 180 degrees difference in terms of the platform that the youth have, and God bless them, they're so vocal, right? That the stuff that they're doing was built on the shoulders of people before and then built on the shoulders of those people before. But for me going through campus, you could speak, but you felt really silenced in a lot of ways. You could protest, but you didn't really have anybody on your side. Now we've got facts. We've got the whole country.
Right.
I think there's a huge difference, and that leads me to say there's a huge opportunity for the kids today on campus. This country has been built on college campuses. So to me, we're prime time right now. People like yourself and so on, if you all don't take it, somebody else will. I'm dead serious. Like, it could be Barry on there or it could be another person. Somebody will take this and will rise up and will be one of the leaders that will be remembered for hundreds of years to come, inshallah. That's going to happen. So it's just a matter of who wants to be on that boat or not. Because that's the inflection point that I think we're at now. But it is a serious 180 shift from when I was growing up. So,
one more thing on that. Yeah. I had like 2 thoughts. One is the importance of advocating for yourself, as a community, as an individual, and your needs. This is always something I'm trying to emphasize with my kids, is like, if you don't if something is bothering you or you have a need, it could be in your high school, it could be in your college, and you don't articulate that and organize around it, no one's going to come to you and say, hey, I mean, this is the unfortunate reality. They might to some communities, but they're not going to come and say, hey, is there something that you need or that we need from you? I mean, the prayer space is a good example. Same thing at Duke. We didn't have one, and then we identified that as a problem. First, they gave us the chapel space, and now there's a center for Muslim life, like a few years after. But it's the same kind of thing, even with Palestine organizing. But just one anecdote, when you said, so my husband is Palestinian, grew up in a refugee camp in Lebanon, came around the same time I did. We met when we were in the US, but he always gives the example of when he came here and he was like 17. He remembers watching a headline like in the mid-90s, and it was some horrible thing that someone had done. He was looking and he was like, oh my God, who are these people? And then he's like, wait a minute, that's me. That's like a Palestinian that they're talking about, right? But of course, completely vague language and, caricatured stereotypes. But that was his introduction to the American media landscape and the portrayal of Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims. And that extends, we'll get to that, of how the way that this whole war started and how the dehumanizing rhetoric used to set the stage and to give themselves a moral pretext to do whatever they wanted. So a lot of what's happening now is bringing back memories of what we experienced earlier, because the same techniques are being used, but much more maliciously right now.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah.
Sorry. I think one of the things that's helped to radically change this dialogue is social media, right? Because when we were growing up, you had a few news channels, and they basically told you the truth. Now we can get our truth from so many other areas, right? And I think that's radically changed. Because before, if CNN said it, then how can you dispute it? But now you can go to TikTok, you can go to Instagram, you can go to Facebook, you can get alternative means, and I think that's radically changed the way that we also engage with the information that's coming out. So I just wanted to add that. And that's where the youth can come.
What I can add on to that is, so I also see a drastic shift between, so I'm the youngest of three, and both my older brothers, they went to college and high school 10, 20 years before I did. And I even see a shift between myself and them, and how they were able to navigate high school and college. And so, right now, there's still always a common theme though. Within your time, within the past 2 generations.
What do you mean our time? How old do you think we are? I'm just kidding. Between the old
right.
timers.
He's right. No, you're right.
No, but within all the generations, the common theme is that we all had to struggle for something. And I'm struggling right now. My generation is struggling right now because we have insane suppression of even just being ourselves. Because, rather than just what you guys propped up for us, there's also the other part where, there's some people within the prior generations that kind of put it down as well. And one thing that I've noticed within my generation is how the fact that being Palestinian or being Muslim wasn't instilled from their parents or from their grandparents, because of how they needed to navigate American assimilation and surviving and getting a job. And so one thing that I've kind of wanted to make like my mission within my campus and within my community is alleviating that, kind of fixing that need to not want to represent Palestine, not want to identify as Palestinian, that there's no need for us to be scared.
Right. To just be like unapologetic and comfortable in your own skin.
Yeah,
but also, sorry, finish your thought. I didn't want to interrupt.
Well, so I've been unapologetically Palestinian since I was born.
Yeah.
Because I remember,
as you should, as everyone should.
And as everyone should.
Yeah.
And I think I even see myself as even a hardcore Palestinian than my own family, because of the fact that I just don't care anymore about someone trying to tell me that I need to be afraid or I need to, lower my voice or I need to, be careful about who I'm
Right.
talking to or how I'm talking about it, because if I start doing that, then خلاص انتهى الموضوع
صح.
completely. You know, we're not gonna call
Yeah.
ourselves Palestinians anymore.
Well, do you know why early يعني Shami, Levantine, يعني Syrian and Lebanese immigrants in the 1920s and the 30s, why they tried to identify as white?
Yeah, because they didn't want to be treated like.
Because it gave them, privileges, and they recognized that, and and we can vote and this and that, and there's a great book by an Iranian American professor called The History of Islam in America, and he devotes like a couple of chapters to this. It's really interesting about this whole idea of like trying to assimilate. And well, if you look the part and you could play the part, they recognize quickly. But then what ends up happening is after about a generation, all of their offspring no longer identified as, not only if they happen to be Muslim, they didn't identify as Muslim, but they also didn't identify as, or they only had a nominal connection to their culture. And so to me, that's very instructive. What ends up happening and at what cost are you assimilating? And of course, for people like me who grew up with a Palestinian passport and a Hawiyya, I didn't have a choice. And Rashid al-Khadi famously said that the quintessential Palestinian experience occurs on borders. So try as you might to hide it, or the moment you are crossing a border somewhere, if you're entering Palestine or at some point in your life, you're going to have this experience that you were talking about where you might be searched, you might be questioned, you might be, someone in your family is identified as, being Palestinian, and suddenly you realize, So, I mean, to me, I didn't have a choice. It was just like, inadvertently, everything was political. I didn't have a choice. I was always being stopped and questioned and interrogated. I have files with like the Shin Bet and the Amn al-Dawla and the FBI. And so I'm like, it's just, that was the thing.
Yeah.
So, but I completely agree. For people who didn't have that experience and who didn't grow up in it, how do you then alleviate that? And,
And that, I'd say that's on me.
Yeah.
And that's on my generation, those who.
I always say, look, growth doesn't happen from a place of comfort.
Yeah.
It happens from a place of discomfort, from being put in a position where, your privilege is challenged. And, and that has a direct impact on your community as well.
Yeah.
One of the things I hate about here is the focus is always on the individual, not on the community and not on the, the larger. Anyways, yeah.
So, we're privileged to be in this community. Me personally, I was privileged to grow up in this community and have a Palestinian American Community Center, have a Palestine wave in my lifetime, have it called Little Palestine. So, I say myself and those who grew up in this community, we kind of grew up in that sort of privilege, and that, we have all these people already around us. We have this greater community that'll back us and,
right.
Represent. So, thank you guys for expanding upon that idea. Let's try to go back to organizing aspect. So, obviously, we're kind of in a moment where Palestine activism, Palestine organizing is at the forefront. Palestinians and people from Gaza, especially if they aren't already, are supposed to be the ones in the front of everything. In terms of our voices, in terms of the narration, the right to narrate. How have you guys been able to narrate for yourselves what's happening to your own families, what's happened to yourselves in terms of how you've been feeling? How have you guys been able to express that? Has it been difficult? Has it been easy? What have been the challenges over the past 5 months, and do you see it continuing?
Do you want to go? For me, I feel like this is sort of a continuation of a sort of lifelong mission, in the sense that we've always felt like, we have to be, as people from Gaza, maybe I'll speak about myself personally, on guard, or like constantly ready to, بالعربي نشمر ايدينا, like just get ready, That's how I've always felt. And I think for a long time when I was younger, not fully understanding, the urgency of conveying that reality myself, and as I keep saying, narrating that experience myself until I moved back there and I lived there and I started, working as a journalist. And then I frequently talk about how sort of not jaded I became, but trying so desperately to convey the reality of what was happening in Gaza. And this is even before the first assault. This is in the second intifada, through the disengagement, the beginning of the blockade, and feeling like I was failing, like I was writing the same headlines over and over again. And even people that I considered friends and allies weren't quite getting it. Like, wait, you can't travel to the West Bank, or you can't, no, how did you not know this basic fact? And I was becoming frustrated. That's what led me eventually to, when I started blogging, and then to use other kinds of medium to raise awareness, to do the cookbook and explore Gaza through different lens, right? Because I felt like that was able to reach wider audiences, using creative outlets to tell the story of Gaza. And so basically that's informed my entire, approach when it comes to how do I talk about Gaza. So when everything happened in October, it wasn't like not that it wasn't a huge shock, but I had that background and that context to build on, to be able to say, this is why none of what just happened should surprise anyone. Because like A, B, C, D. And that's usually what I spend time talking about, is elaborating on that context of the past 17 years that led up to this. And using that, I would say it was only a sort of a watershed moment, or for probably my 16-year-old who isn't here today, because for her, that was her kind of coming of age moment. For me, it was, first intifada probably. But that was her coming of age moment as a young Palestinian American who's been to Gaza, but was born and raised here, who suddenly was realizing, oh my gosh, in high school, everything was being challenged. My ability to hold a walkout, or, my ability to say river from the sea, suddenly my First Amendment rights. And so helping guide her through that, and explain to her that you have to be unapologetic, you have to push back, you can't let these people silence you. It's things we take for granted, but if you're 16, you're thinking, oh, but this person in a position of power is telling me I can't say this. I'm like, well, let's explore and unpack that a little bit. Why is he saying that? Where does it say that? And do you know what I mean? What are your rights? Let's call the ACLU. Let's do this. Let's do that. So that's kind of what I spent a lot of my time doing, is trying to teach her how to navigate the system that seemed out to get her and to silence her. And tapping into other movements, and how have other movements, like when there's been moments like this, what have they done? If that makes sense. So kind of using a lot of my experience and knowledge to usher in this other generation of children, and helping them. And they didn't have the tools they needed to. Because I think for a long time, the big thing for them was post 9/11. It wasn't necessarily Palestine or Gaza, but suddenly this became, right, the issue. And in some weird way, it almost came to clash with like a lot of the Muslim activism. I don't know if that makes sense, but there was this tension of like, some Muslim Americans saying like, oh, no, that shouldn't be the issue. Like, the issue is Islamophobia, and others saying, no, don't make it the issue just, you know what I mean? And so everything kind of came to a head in a way.
Yeah, no. I think for me, it's sort of a few things. One is it's, on the one hand, it was never harder to tell the story. When I first started getting called by the folks like CNN and these guys to do interviews, they were basically telling me nobody is answering their calls. Nobody wants to go in front of the TV. Nobody wants to say anything. Everybody was really scared because...
From the community.
From the community, because we can't remember that people were getting doxxed.
Yeah.
People their jobs are at risk.
Yeah.
If they say anything, they're worried what the impact is.
Yes.
So it was, on the one hand, it was hard to tell the story. And as I started to tell the story, I realized I was getting asked more and more and more to tell my story because there was really nobody else to tell it.
Right.
Not just my story, but any story. So that was on the one hand. But on a whole nother end of the spectrum...
and you're right, I think we take for granted that the voices that are willing, the people who are willing and able, I'll use both of those words, to tell the story and to talk, aren't. I always just assume, well, everyone, but you're right. People either don't have the tools or the know-how, or they're kind of afraid about the impact or the...
Yeah.
So that's a whole other kind of set of problems.
Yeah, and we see that everywhere. There's lawyers who had their offers rescinded right? There's 3 Harvard Law School graduates that had their offers rescinded. There is one young lady down in the DC area that was fired because of her online comments. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, though, as I went and I saw that the masajid, right, I'm like, we need to gather. We need to just start making a statement. So we started a group right away with the masajid, right? And we started producing letters, really strong letters. And we sent them to all of our New Jersey legislators at first. And we had 67 masajid sign on to this letter. I don't remember the last time 67 masajid agreed on anything. Literally nothing. Not Ramadan, not Eid, nothing. We can't agree on anything, but we agreed on this.
Yeah.
So it was never easier to agree on anything. I actually don't think that for Muslims in particular, people of conscience in general, that there's ever been such an easier time to unite. And so we united on that platform, and we sent letters to the New Jersey legislators. And we met with so many of them, from the Speaker of the House to the President of the Senate and so on. We then sent it to our federal legislators. We then sent a letter to over 200 universities. So the first letter we had 67 signatures. The last letter we sent just a few weeks ago, we had over 200 signatories of all mosques and organizations from around this area to 200 universities around the country, including yours, Montclair State.
Oh, wow, okay.
Stating, because we saw what happened to Claudine Gay at Harvard and what happened at Penn and so on. And we said that we are cognizant of what those issues, but we need you to stand up for the Muslim students, the Palestinian Arab students that are not Muslim, the Christians. We need you to stand up as university leaders. So there's never been an easier time, at the same time that it's never been as hard a time, right, to actually tell our story. Because people want to listen. They're actually actively asking us to participate, and we are the ones that are a little bit reticent to maybe put our hats in the ring. But this group of masajid now that's never formed before is now there. So I really feel like, and by the way, this is actually just an example that's happening all across the country. There are groups that are forming all throughout the country. I'm a part of a C4 PACC group. I don't know if anybody here knows what C4s and PACCs are, but they're basically political advocacy engines. C4 for policies, PACs to advocate for candidates. There's like 14 states that just started one within the past month. You're talking about infrastructure that's never existed. Washington State, which I didn't even know that there were Muslims there, right? Washington State created a PAC, did a fundraiser, and they have $500,000 in their PAC now.
Well, I'll do you one better. One of the biggest Gaza, he's like a real estate developer, and strongest voices on Gaza is in South Dakota. Yeah. And one of the biggest, well-known, so there you go.
And my point is that the ground is fertile right now.
Yes.
For activism. There's probably never been a better time, you'll probably never find a better time, that you can actually make some movement.
Yeah.
If you want to raise money, if you want to raise your voice, if you want to do anything, you can do it now. And people are listening, despite the fact that you might have those first concerns I talk about. But the world is ready. And of course, what we keep telling people is history will remember this.
Yeah.
Does anybody here know what Martin Luther King's approval rating was when he died or was assassinated? Low. Anybody want to guess? I mean, we have a national holiday. Yeah, go ahead.
I would say below 15%.
Yeah, it was 30%.
Wow.
70% of our country disapproved of Martin Luther King when he was killed. We now have a national holiday for Martin Luther King. I think he's the only human that we have a national holiday just centered around him, that we actually all take off, right? He's that level. I think Columbus Day is getting sort of eradicated. They're calling it something else now.
In Maryland, it's called Indigenous People Day.
Yeah, it's called Indigenous People Day.
Yeah.
He is the only one. Now that tells you something about history. That you're not always going to see the fruits of your labor. You're not always going to be the one that gets the glory at the time, but you will cause an impact if you are on the right side of justice.
Right.
If you are on the right side of history, you will see that impact come. And you need to ask yourself, what is your struggle compared to other people's struggle? What is it that you have to lose that they haven't already lost? What is it that you might be able to do? I feel this weight, and I don't know if you feel this weight. I feel this weight on my shoulders. that I have those family over there. I could have been born there. I could have been living there. I could have been just another name on a bomb, but I'm here. And if you're here, when you're eating your delicious meal or hanging out with your beautiful family and enjoying your beautiful peace, you need to think for a moment, what of this can I sacrifice for them? Am I willing to take a hit on some of my comfort? Am I willing to take a hit on some of my financial status? Am I willing to take a hit on some of my, worldly...
Comfort.
Yeah, or name brand.
Yeah.
Because when you go out there, it is treacherous. Leadership is dangerous. You can get killed being a leader. And I'm not just talking about the type of killing that you end up in the ground. I'm talking about the type of killing where your entire being, whether it's online or in person, has been destroyed. Where you walk in the street and they say, oh, that's that guy. That's hard. And many of us are not willing to do that, but you got to ask yourself why. And you got to push yourself to see why. I'm the vice president for my board of education. My town is not Muslim, right? I think I do a great job, not because of anything else, but because of the moral compass, because of my background. Because I know what people who are underprivileged, who don't have a voice, feel like. And I speak for them in every frame. And that's been a mistake, too, that we do as Palestinians and Muslims in general, is we don't stand up for the others. We care about our own causes, but where are we when there's causes for Hispanic people, for black people? There's a lot of allyship. There's a lot of parallels between our experiences and their experiences. We need to do a better job of that. But when I go at the end of my Board of Education meeting, I will literally say, and I pray for the peace for my family that's been killed in Gaza. For the people that are there that can't get out. And I tell them in details what's happening. Now, could that risk something for me? Sure. But should I sacrifice that platform to not do something? No, we have to be brave, and now is the time.
He's like, why isn't the government doing the right thing? When did they ever do the right thing? When it came to civil rights, when it came to anything else, right? It's only when there's enough, I think it's called the 3% rule, when there's a shift in 3% of the population's perception on a particular issue, that then suddenly momentum builds and culture changes and then government takes notice and policies change. That's an important formula to remember. It hasn't changed. It's pretty consistent over time. But the other thing is like and then I feel like after, and you're right, like feeling since day one, since October 7th, I felt this sense of like urgency and obligation that we don't have a choice. Like we're obligated to act. Even if we're not from Gaza, just by virtue of the fact that we're American taxpayers financing this, then you need to do everything in your power, whatever that is. If it's on the very micro, local level in your community councils and the school, do something, whatever is in your capacity to do. I feel like we were like a little slow to respond. I mean, it took us by shock, obviously. But I mean, an example I give is like even on our school level, we live in like a very progressive county in Maryland, and something as simple as a school organized walkout was trying to be shut down. And I kept wondering, like, why is this the case? It almost felt like there was a script everyone was following. And then I found out I subscribed to the Greater Jewish Federation of, like, the DMV, the DC, Maryland area. They had sent out, like, a toolkit to every K-12 school in the entire DMV, from Maryland to DC to Northern Virginia, telling them how they should react. And the responses going so far as to give them scripts for letters they should send out to the community, and telling them you might anticipate that students might ask for a walkout on ceasefire. I kid you not. This is why that's a bad idea. And I couldn't believe this. They were telling school administrators, anticipate students might want to, call for an end to the war, and this is why you should tell them don't do it. And so I was shocked, and it made me realize, God, like we should have had a toolkit. I mean, again, it took us by surprise for all the reverse things, but it took a lot of pushback. They wouldn't even let them say, it was like this watered down walk down where you can't mention Gaza or siege or anything. It's just you're calling for a ceasefire somewhere, for some people, for something, But I mean, these are the kinds of things that, another thing is choosing and questioning your allyships and your, a lot of the faith washing that was happening. In one of our local masjids, somebody that, was doing interfaith work for so long, even that, and I had always warned her, like, just, be careful about who you're, and, you have to look into their policies and politics. Well, guess what? We were having a ceasefire resolution in our county, and it was up for discussion. Guess who were the people that were, vocal, aggressively vocal, saying slurs and all kinds of things against us, disrupting the council? It was the rabbis that the masjid was doing the interfaith work with. I mean, I was appalled. We were like, had a silent protest, raised bloody hands. And I was telling them, I was like, these are the people. I mean, this is a red line. Like, if a faith leader is standing up and actively saying, not only do I oppose the cessation of killing of innocent civilians, but in fact, I want it to continue. I mean, I'm like, that's a red line. So you really need to begin to question, who are you doing interfaith work with, and why, and what are your red lines, and what do you stand for? Do we have toolkits ready, as a community, in case something like this happens again? Are we being even proactive and going to our schools and saying, I think there should be a day or an assembly where you discuss these issues? Like, those are all the issues that I began to realize we weren't, as ready for.
Yep.
Thank you. I could add so much more just from my experience, but just because we're running low on time, we're gonna get into a Q&A soon. I just wanted to ask you a little bit regarding the court case. So,
Yeah.
Obviously there was a case that was filed, and you were a plaintiff on that case against President Joe Biden, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, and Secretary of Defense Austin.
Yeah.
So.
It's funny how everyone hesitates when they think of his name. It's like, what role do you serve? Does anyone know who you are or what you do? It's like, I don't know.
Is clearly defending someone.
Yeah.
But so, what was the mindset going into that? Was it like, okay, we're gonna file a lawsuit against three of probably the most powerful people on the planet? What was the expected outcome? Were there any setbacks in even beginning to think of this? If you could just fill us in.
So the Center for Constitutional Rights reached out to me and a couple of others in, I'm going to say November. And to Sami's point, very few people were willing to take on these roles, They were hesitating, they were afraid, and so they said, we're thinking of filing this lawsuit, and would you be, willing, interested? And I said, yes, absolutely. As someone who's had several family members directly killed by Israeli forces, my aunt and several of my cousins in Gaza City, but someone who's, obviously an American citizen, and they had other plaintiffs who were not American citizens. To be honest, initially we didn't expect much, and I was like, what's this about? And of course, this was in the beginning where we were still dealing with the day-to-day of the actual, assault before it even became clear that it had developed into a full-fledged genocide. And so our expectations were pretty low. The idea that we thought going in was to be able to, at the very least, raise awareness about what was going on, and really to use every tool at our disposal. This is something I constantly emphasize to people. I think we always just try to think of things as the bare minimum. We're very sort of cynical and jaded, nothing will work, blah, blah, blah. But this just really showed me, no, you have to just, اعقل وتوكل, just tie your camel and rely, do everything in your power. You can't overthink, I think, the results. You have to put forth the effort and the work in whatever way you know how and you're able, right? And inshallah, that will bear fruits, collectively. So we didn't have a lot of expectations going in, but as, momentum built and the day got closer, we were shocked, and the legal team was shocked to find that the federal judge on the case, not only had he granted an in-person testimony. They didn't think that would happen. They thought the most that would happen is that the case will immediately get dismissed and it won't even make it to the court. And even if it didn't get dismissed, they might just the judge wouldn't allow any testimony at all, and it would just all be virtual. That's what they thought. And so they were shocked to discover not only did it not get dismissed initially, but the judge also allowed in-person testimony. And then they were scrambling to, get us all there and prep everyone. And we went into the courtroom. Again, none of us really knew what to expect. They had prepped us for all scenarios, including cross-examination by the government lawyers. And the judge stood up, and of course it was being and he had allowed it to be live streamed to 1,000 registrants, which was very unexpected. And he started off by giving an unprompted, prepared remarks, the judge, the federal judge, which he didn't have to do, which really set the tone for the entire day. That he was essentially saying, what's happening is atrocious. It shouldn't be allowed to happen. I want to give you all the space you need to be able to let your witnesses testify. So we were all like looking at each other. Even the lawyers didn't expect this. This was unprecedented for a federal judge to make these kinds of remarks about something like this, where he could have easily, again, just immediately gotten the thing. I said, nope, dismissed, right? And so allowing hours of testimony, including by a doctor in Gaza, right, who was under a bombardment, found a hallway, having that live stream to the court, a lawyer with Elhaddad, several eyewitness testimonies, including, relatives in the US and so on. And to hear lengthy discussion of the Nakba for the first time in the history of a US court, and comparing that, to acknowledge the Nakba, to explain what that was, to have this on the court record now, a federal US court record, and to compare that to what was happening now, that just in and of itself was remarkable and was a huge success and a huge win. But then on top of that, to have the judge conclude by having these closing remarks and saying, I want everyone here to know you have been seen and you have been heard, was very validating and uplifting and empowering for all of us who up until that point, we felt suffocated and completely silent. We still do, obviously. We felt powerless and helpless. This felt like and it was important. It was important not only for us, but our families who gave us this mandate. Us, I don't know how you feel, but I constantly feel sheepish saying, I'm feeling like helpless. Like I keep apologizing. And they're like, no, we want you to know. And they keep saying, tell this to everyone. Keep doing what you're doing. The last thing we want you to do, because this will really feel like you've abandoned us, is to not talk anymore about us, not to amplify what's happening, not to write op-eds, not to speak out, not to go to court. Keep doing all of this. So that's where I derive my mandate from. And this was incredibly important to them. And then to hear a Jewish genocide studies expert, Dr. Barry Trachtenberg, get up there and testify that in all my years of studying of Holocaust studies and genocide studies, we don't do this because we enjoy it or for the theory of the subject matter, right? We do it to prevent future genocides for a moment like this. And to have him stand up there and say, this is a genocide. Not only do I agree as an expert, but everyone else. And to have the US government lawyers try to object to him over and over and over to shut him down, like multiple times, and to have the judge overrule every objection was an incredibly powerful moment. And to then have the judge conclude that, pursuant to everything he had heard and to the ICJ ruling that happened on the same day, I conclude as a federal judge, this is a plausible genocide. There is no doubt in my mind that everything the Israelis are doing with US support is intended to eradicate an entire people, and that were I not restricted by the separation of powers, were it in my ability to do more, I would. But this is the most I can do, is to have this on the state record, to state that this is a plausible genocide, and to implore the U.S. government to question, in his words, the unflagging support that they are giving diplomatically, financially, and militarily to the Israeli government as they, continue to execute this plausible genocide. And to implore, he went further, it was like this rallying cry to every American. He said, I implore every American to do what they can to put an end to this military siege on Gaza, was amazing. And I don't think that people really got a sense of it, because we were in the courtroom and it wasn't being televised, and it was overruled by the whole UNRWA thing that had happened that day. But it was really an incredible moment, and I really hope, I told my daughter, can you tell your US history teacher about this? I really hope this is a moment that is used as a case study, I don't know if you had anything else to add. Or
That's amazing.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think it's important to balance these overwhelming feelings of helplessness and hopelessness that we feel with moments like that, because otherwise we'll just sort of crumple down and feel like there's nothing we can do. We have to convert that anger and that emotion into action, as Sami kept saying. In whatever way we know how, at whatever level, to sustain the movement.
So, thank you so much. I figured we needed to hear that kind
of
synopsis of what happened, because I'm sure don't even know that the case even occurred. So, thank
Yeah.
you for that. Thank you
And by the way, Biden is the only sitting U.S. president Biden is the only sitting U.S. president that has been accused and found, not found guilty, but accused of a plausible genocide by a standing federal judge. So this is significant as we think of the abandoned Biden movement and as we think of, all the choices that we as American voters, have to make going forth with this next election. In other words, abandon Biden. Yeah.
We're going to move into a really quick question and answer because we do not have a lot of time. But so I have one question. How can we get more people in our community to be involved in important meetings / education like this one today? We got some empty seats over here, so how do we get all of them filled next time?
Hand over to Sami.
I
Pray that it doesn't rain. No, I'm kidding.
I think our lives are opportunities. Like
Yeah.
everywhere you go, there's an opportunity. Don't hesitate to talk to the people that are next to you. Those are the people that are most likely going to be. I don't even know how effective even CNN or these huge broadcast channels are anymore, right? Social media has really reduced down to a very achievable level your voice to resonate across a whole population. The people you know, the people that you're close to, those are the people that you can, I think, affect. On my Board of Education board, I have an African-American brother, Walter, and he was telling me how his daughter now wears her keffiyeh. She's a Black Christian girl, wears her keffiyeh everywhere now. Everywhere, right? I mean, that's the type of stuff that there are a lot of allies. I actually call it a silent majority. I think we have a silent majority here that they're scared. We need to give them space. We need to help create that safety for them to be able to feel like they can speak up. And then there's so many opportunities. I'm going to speak at a high school in a I think Tuesday or Monday. I forgot one of these days coming up. To a whole school full of kids. So all of our young people can start bringing people into their schools, right? Into some of these mentors. They've been doing it for a while, the other side, right? So to come in and speak our truths to those folks, right? You can create those opportunities. I think one thing that we've lacked is some creativity. I feel like everything...
So explain how. Like, how do you go through the process of letting a school come,
Yeah, and a lot of it is student-based. If the student themselves wants to do something, they can just go to their principal and request it. We need to empower our young people to do stuff like that.
Right.
We did it at my son's school too. We had people to get invited. So my point is that we need to be more creative. I feel like a lot of times what we do is we default to they're doing it, so we'll do it.
Yes.
Oh, well, we can do it because they already did it. Like there's some safety in that.
Or someone else is doing it, so I don't have to, right?
Yeah, there's that too. But I think that if there's some creativity involved, like, okay, so you see a gap, fill the gap. Fill the gap. What are you waiting for?
Right.
You have, maybe make it an opportunity, like at least once a week, I'm going to make some type of movement forward, once a day or something like that. But there are so many opportunities that I've found just around, whether it's on my Board of Education or whether it's, on the masjid board or through Silru. Right now, it's the kids at Rutgers have a petition going around. We just started today to revoke Hilal from the campus and their executive director. This happened from the students. So that's happening right now. Why can't we have similar movement? Because right now, what they're doing against the Muslim students is the executive director has been saying heinous things about Muslims and about Palestinians. She should not be allowed on campus. Why is she allowed? Right? So this is an example of where we don't have to wait for them to say that about us. No.
Right.
You got to get out of here. You're doing the wrong thing. We just have to be creative and a little bit brave. And I think we'll get there. And I think there's micro opportunities everywhere in our life to make those positive reverberations where you can talk to somebody who then tells their little family. And then that sort of goes on through time.
I think it's important to remind people that it's sustained, consistent effort and activism. We tend to think of these big, if there's a big, huge march, those are important too. And I attend that, and then I kind of you know, you know, use up my sort of quota of activism for that, and then that's it. And then you're like, why isn't anything happening? Why isn't anything changing? But it's the sustained, consistent, small efforts and actions that really make the difference. And you know, it could be, what's your area of strength, right? It could be focusing on youth. It could be, you know, it could be something as simple as, I was saying, I love the idea of the Tatris circle. Maybe you want to, my thing is always, how can I reach new audiences, and how can I, or if it's within our community, I think, okay, what's missing? Maybe it's trying to empower them, or as you said, alleviate that, you know, you know, fear or tension. Maybe it's educating them. Sometimes we don't know enough about our own particular aspect of our own cause to be able to inform others or to feel comfortable enough to speak. So maybe it's doing that. Maybe it's doing teach-ins, or so there's a lot of. But I love the idea of even doing a Tatris circle on a regular basis, or a supper club, and then inviting someone, a guest outside of the community. That's something very simple that people can do. So we shouldn't always think of it in terms of these really big things and feeling, and then because then you end up feeling like, well, there's nothing I can do. I can't contribute. Being involved in your school and so on. But wearing conversation starter. I remember early on in like October, I was wearing like an End Israeli Apartheid hoodie, and I was going to my daughter's gymnastics, who was asleep right there. And my other daughter was like, are you sure this is a good idea? I think one of the co-owners of the place is Israeli or something like that. I was like, no, don't worry about it. And I go in there, it's really crowded. And it was at a time when people were still tense because people were getting like harassed and shot and whatever for wearing kufiyas. And I went in there, and then this African-American sister sees me, and she like raises a fist really loudly in front of hundreds of people and goes, "Free Palestine!" You know, so they all, my daughter was like amazed, and I was like, "Why are you surprised?" And she's like, "No, because again, there's this assumption that you're going to be targeted, but there's a silent majority that's waiting for an opportunity, you know, and just don't always know, where do I go, where do I head, how do I get involved, right?"
Thank you. I mean, I'll definitely give props to PACC for being one of those places where, there is like that consistency of,
yes, that's why I always love coming here. Always come back, right? And hope everyone continues to come and participates in all the other programs we have. But yeah, PACC is like that consistent place where, you know, we do have those conversations, we do hold those smaller things where people can try and, you know, get involved in something. And there's also the SJPs on campuses. Like I see it firsthand that even other Arab or other Palestinian students, they don't even have the idea of being involved in that. Because the automatic thing when they hear of SJP is like, all right, I'm gonna like get shot. I'm not gonna stay in college. I'm gonna get expelled, or I'm never gonna get a job, which is completely untrue, because I'm chilling. You know, we try and push to get other students involved. We try and encourage them and tell them, you're gonna be fine. You know, we just need more people. We just need people to be unafraid. We need to be unabashedly supportive of Palestine and unabashedly Palestinian. And so we're, you know, it's a process, but we're doing it on every level. Should I? Did anyone have? I feel bad. We took over. I feel like people do. We won't talk as long. We'll let people ask the questions between the two of us. I feel like.
So we have lunch next. So if we take questions, it takes away from lunchtime. So that's
Oh, that's not fair.
No, we'll have one question, and then if you will, I think Sami and Laila are happy to take any questions after. Is that okay?
Yeah. I mean, I would like to engage. I feel bad. We kind of talked for a long time.
No, you're okay. So, hi, my name is Sada.
Yeah.
I do a lot of Palestine organizing, and normally we've seen before October a gap between the Muslim community and Palestinian organizers.
Yes.
And a lot of the fear after 9/11 is what I've seen the Muslim community, and I missed that, but I don't know, I like separating, like the disengagement, like we're not going to engage in Palestine organizing because of that fear, and that's what I'm assuming. And a lot of the time with MSAs on campus, like there is normalization with Zionist, like interfaith,
Yes.
with Zionist community, and we have SJP saying like, well, what are you doing? Why are we normalizing, you know, apartheid, colonial apartheid?
Right.
And then MSA will be like, well, we are interfaith. This is how we should engage. the gap that was there, do you feel like it's closing? Do you feel like the unreadiness with, you were saying the DMV action of like,
Yeah.
we didn't feel we were ready? I feel like it's because maybe the Muslim community hasn't engaged in that
Yes.
sort of politics, right? Do you feel like the gap's closing? Do you recognize it was there? And do you feel like there is, we were becoming more radicalized as a Muslim community because we have
Yes.
been politicized historically,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth.
Yeah. I'll just say, and then I'll hand it to you. Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I could, yes, I feel like the gap is closing, and at least it's becoming more evident, like where we draw the lines, meaning like you still have the faith washing, you still have those communities, the Muslim communities that want to engage in faith washing or want to, but now they're more like ostracized, or they're going to be considered more pariahs. I could also think back to like talking about student organizing in the 90s, even before 9/11. This was always a problem, where the MSA never wanted to, it wasn't even Palestine at the time, Iraq. Anytime we'd want to do a protest or some action on the sanctions, they would be like, no, we're not doing political stuff, right? Even back then, it was super frustrating, so we had to create like an Arab student organization. And then, of course, 9/11 happened. And I think like with the advent of organizations like CARE after 9/11 and AMP, and the gap has gradually narrowed. And I feel like even historic organizations like ICNA, they're based out of the Baltimore area where I am. For years, they would kind of avoid Palestine. And then over the past few years, that has taken a radical shift too, where they're tackling it. Those are all really, to me, really excellent developments. I think where the problem lies is, like you said, where it was these issues of normalizing, and everyone's familiar, of course, with MLI, Muslim Leadership Initiative, that kind of stuff. But I feel like, alhamdulillah, as I said, people have called them out, or are doing a good job at calling them out. And I don't know what else you wanted to add, but we still have, I do feel like we weren't quite prepared. And I know I can speak on the community level, like, I told my husband and others very involved in the Muslim community, started to call all the masajid, form a task force, which didn't exist before, say, hey, how are we going to respond to this in the future? What's our policy when it comes to, because they did tend to shy away from that kind of political, it was only like engagement when it came to their benefit, right? When it was the county executive wanting to recognize them, or come have iftar for Ramadan. Where I was like, well, hey, hang on a second. The county executive also made this statement where he complete erasure of Palestinians. So pushing back on that and getting organized on that, that's really important. Not just saying we're so excited, or that the state senator decided to come and recognize our masjid, the photo op, right? That's stuff that shouldn't be, it's not business as usual, shouldn't be allowed to happen, especially when there's an active genocide. Pushing back and saying, no, this is, as constituents, as a community, these are the issues that matter to us. We will not take pictures with you if you're not doing X, Y, Z. This was a big teachable moment when it came to that kind of stuff. And I noticed it happening, and I noticed improvements on that in our community, where in the past we were just so happy to welcome anyone into our communities, like, oh, they're recognizing us, or whatever, so.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation. I think we're in a unique point in time where that does come together. I do expect it to separate again. I don't think that this will stay as united. And some of that has good reasons and bad reasons. Muslims are very, so when people compare Muslims to other initiatives that are going on, it's really not a fair comparison for a few reasons. One, the Jewish cause following Israel is a very singular cause. Muslims have many
Identities.
for better or for worse, many areas around the world, and many fires. Somebody said a statement to me yesterday or the day before, like, oh, well, this genocide is nothing like what we've seen in 50 years. I'm like, that's not true. It's just flat out not true. Over 1 million children were killed in the Iraqi war, right? Yemen is suffering from one of the worst catastrophic, at the hands of Muslims, but using US bombs, right? So Kashmir, Sudan, like these are huge crises. So we as an ummah will always be separated in a way, but that's not a bad thing either. Right now we have a singular focus because of the time, and we need to be able to understand that and really push as far as we can, but understand that it will probably fade as the next thing comes, and the next thing after that, and the next thing after that. So I do believe that there was a divide, but I think there was a divide because some of those things existed. I do think that certain things are not going to change. And I do think that the reason they're not going to change is obvious for a lot of reasons. I mean, you had
But Sami,
APPAC.
the reason that this is different is because I always point out, because this is an argument that the other side.
I'm actually getting
it's
to
because
that.
of the amount
Yeah.
of money.
I'm getting to the part that won't change.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
just before I get there, you had, not to call out other institutions, but you had a political action committee, one of those PACs that was run by Muslims, that met with somebody in Long Island running for Congress that was an IDF soldier. She's an IDF soldier. And you're donating, they handed her a $10,000 check.
Are you serious? When did this happen?
This happened 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
This happened 2 weeks ago. That Muslims went and handed a check to an IDF soldier, right? This is 2 weeks ago. This is at the height of what we're talking about. So but the things that will change, I believe, are that no longer will Muslims be the photo op or even tolerant of the photo op uncles, right? I think they're getting called out because even after, on the heels of that, this IDF soldier who, thank God, she lost in the primary in New York. People are now going to be
God, that
scared.
deserves a big tfu.
Yeah, people are going to be terrified to now be on those sides because they're going to get called out because of people like you, Sarah, right? Because people are going to say, no, we don't accept that crap anymore. Those
Yes.
days are done.
Yes.
If your masjid is aligning and doing these interfaith with people that were not standing on the right side of this history, what should you all do?
Right. Yes.
What are you going to your
Yes,
own masjid?
yes.
To your own masjid, you're going to go and say, you're not my leaders anymore.
Yes,
Get out.
yes.
So those things are going to change, and they already have begun to change. There is a letter that I drafted that we're going to hopefully send to every masjid that our guidance as a Muslim coalition is to not allow a single politician into the masjid that did not call for a ceasefire.
I love that. Yeah.
We've already syndicated it to about 30 masajid, but if you see your masjid inviting these folks in,
Yes.
first of all, stand up. You could tell me, but you should be doing it yourself. Right. Don't allow that crap to happen. So that's the part that will change, and I don't think that will ever go back. Yeah. And whether it's for Palestine or Hinditfa or any other thing that's happening, we need to stand very principled in our approach. The other thing that I think will never change, inshallah, is the fact that we now see beyond the Muslim fold. There is now efforts to create these allyships with other indigenous people that have faced similar things. Yeah. That should never change again. We should never be allowed to resort back to, this is affecting me and only me.
Right.
That type of stuff has to end. Not just because it's convenient for us, because that's the right thing to do. If you're Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ always did that. That was his being. If there was some wrong happening to some person, irrespective of their faith or their religion, whether they believed in God or didn't believe in God, he was the first to stand up for them. So if you're a follower of that man, then do that today. Right? So these are things that will forever change. This bubble has been popped. The third thing that will forever change, I believe, is that all the veils have been lifted. I think before we were living in this really weird world where we thought we actually had some clout, where we actually thought that we meant something. We now know we are dirt. We are nothing. That we will get pounced no matter how much we say, no matter how big the rallies are, no matter how much we scream. Nobody cares. It still rolls on. That is going to change forever. And I think what you're going to see is people like you that are going to now get into those positions of power and change that forever. So to me, this whole, but Cory Booker's our friend. No. Oh, Bob Menendez is our friend, right? Josh Gottheimer, can you come and sit at my Eid thing and give a speech? All that crap's done, right or wrong. Is it ever going to go back? Are you ever going to let that go back? Because if you do, then shame on us.
Yeah.
Then shame on us for not learning that situation. People who took those pictures with Josh Gottheimer are now having to apologize to me, and I'm sure to all of you. Oh, well, I didn't know. He was very different back then. No, he wasn't. You just didn't realize what he was like. And I know I'm not supposed to get political because it's a 501c3, but you get 15% advocacy work. And all the statements I'm saying are my statements and have nothing to do with PACC. So Now I can say it freely. So now you can go and abandon all these people, right? And there are nuances too. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You will not get a whole 180 right away. So somebody like Governor Murphy has done some good things, and we need to acknowledge those good things. Real Muslim, if you're a good Muslim, you care about all humanity. So we cannot be limited to these types of models that have worked in the past. We got to define our own model, define our own stakes in the game, and make it clear and fund them and not be scared to stand up for them.
Yeah. I just want to say really quickly on the issue of like people we consider, you know, who have our back, or you were talking about Cory Booker. I'm in Maryland, and we have one of the most like progressive senators when it comes to, you know, Palestine in general, so Chris Van Hollen, okay? Now, historically, he has a very close connection with Gaza. He's helped in the past multiple people get out of Gaza. They have friends in Gaza, so he's had one of the only senators that has been able to actually assist when people have been stuck. So we were perplexed when he wouldn't call for a ceasefire for weeks, and we kept meeting with him. First, he tried not to meet with us, and then I caught him. A friend said there's a dinner party coming, and I know him, and I was like, and he just kept saying, I'm so sorry, it's horrible, I can't believe what's happening, we're trying to get more than a liter of water. I'm like, we don't want water, like we want you to stop killing us.
Yeah.
And we couldn't figure it out, and we had 3 different groups of people meet with him, and, you know, like we structured the meetings, and finally in December we had enough, and we're like, you know what, we're done with like the nice words. If you, of all people, aren't calling for a ceasefire, what can we expect from anyone else, right? And so then people took a different approach. They found out his address. For 2 weeks, every day, they were showing up to his house. They were sending him thousands of birthday cards on his birthday saying, happy birthday, Chris Van Hollen. Too bad children of Gaza can't celebrate their birthdays. His wife was going to go nuts. They were banging drums in front of his house because by the way, senators' addresses are public information. You can find them. For 2 weeks, every day, they were showing up in the morning and the evening, banging drums in front of his house. In exactly 2 weeks, he called for a ceasefire. You know, now, that's not the end of but it was a huge thing. I mean, 3 months of meeting with him and advocacy, whatever, didn't bear fruit, but just a disruption. But this goes to show when extreme circumstances require extreme measures. Being nice isn't going to get achievable results. Making people's lives, politicians' lives uncomfortable the way they're doing in front of Blinken's home, that gets results, that gets results. So you need to make these people uncomfortable. You know, we don't do photo ops when there's a genocide happening, you know? You hold them accountable when they're not calling for a ceasefire. If we don't demand that of them, who's going to demand it? They're like, oh, the Muslims, they're always going to want to take pictures with us, right? So I agree. I mean, that's on us, right? You know.
Yeah, you guys are right.
There's something else I wanted to say, but I can't remember. No, I lost I got so, you know. Oh, I do. One more thing. Sorry. When you talked about that cause of Palestine and the Muslims, I agree, but also I think it's important to remember, like, you know, Omar Suleiman always talks about not essentializing the Palestinian cause as just a Muslim cause, or not just a religious thing. That's one small component. What I always say to people is the reason it's different, unique, whatever you want to say, you know, the argument I use is because more of our tax dollars go to fund that machine, the apartheid machine, the occupation, in this case the genocide, than any other country on earth. More of our tax dollars go to, so then that alone is reason enough, you know, not just as Muslims, as Americans, to pay attention and to do something. There's often this detraction of, well, it's not a Muslim cause, it's not a whatever. It's not exclusively, it shouldn't be. It's an American cause, it's whatever, right? But that alone, I always remind people, you know, that should not be allowed to stand. That much of our tax dollars going to fund something as atrocious as this should not be allowed to stand. And for that reason alone, it should take up our attention and our imagination and our effort and advocacy.